We continue now at the top of Daf Chavdalet Amid Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 24b. On the previous summit, Rava asked whether there's a concept of Savalei Tumah or not. The idea of Savalei Tumah is, let's say an item is already Tameh, and then a Tameh individual were to touch that Tameh item again. Does it become Tameh again for the purpose of passing that Tumah along, let's say, to some other item? Or do we say Savalei Tumah, once it's already Tameh, it's satiated with that Tumah, there's not going to be any further Tumah? And Abaya says, we see from a Mishnah in Kalim that certainly there is no concept of Savalei Tumah, because the Mishnah in Kalim says, let's say there's a sheet that is Tameh Medris. It's Tameh Medris, which Rashi says means Medris Sheshochav Olav Zav. A Zav lied upon the sheet, and in that case the sheet would have the Tumah at the level of an Av HaTumah, V'aso Vilon, and then that sheet, instead of being used as a sheet to lie down upon, it's turned into a Vilon, a curtain. So then a Tahor Min HaMedris, then it's Tahor from having that Tumas Medris, which is that high level of Tumah as an Av HaTumah. Avol Tameh Mago Medris, but it's considered as if it touched Medris, meaning it itself was Medris, and then it touched itself, so to speak, so it has that Tumas Maga touching Medris, which is essentially the level of a Rishon LaTumah. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Be'eza medris nagazeh, what medris did this sheet touch? Meaning it can't really touch itself. Ella, rather, we do say as follows, Shim naga bo hazav, let's say the zav not only lied down upon it, but also touched the sheet, so then tamei mago hazav, then it would be tamei at the level of mago hazav, of touching a zav, which is the level of a rishon latumah. So Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the Tanakama in terms of the concept that the sheet touched itself and has the tumah of Maga Medris, but he says that if a Zav did touch it, in addition to the fact that a Zav lied upon it, so then when it's turned from a sheet that you lie upon into a curtain, it's going to have that tumah of Maga Hazav. And so the Gemara Abaya continues his proof, Ki naga bo hazav, but if the Zav does touch the sheet, miha tameh, it is going to be tameh. Vafilu levasof, that's true even if the Zav touched it after he lied upon it. In other words, he laid down upon it and gave it that tumas medris, and then he touched it later and gave it the tumah of mago hazav, and apparently it absorbed that tumah. We don't say savalei hatumah. So amai, why should that be true? Lema savalei tumah. If there's a concept of being satiated with tumah, we should say that it's satiated with tumah. It doesn't receive the tumah that second time. And so you see from this Mishnah, there is no concept of savalei tumah. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei, he said to him, Rava said to Abaya, Umimai dahaishim naga bo hazav, but how do you know that it said that when it says that the Zav touched it, Levasar Medris, who says that he touched it after it was lied upon? Dilma Mekame Medris. Maybe what happened was the Zav touched the sheet first, and then there was Medris. Then he lied upon the sheet. To have a Tumah Chamura al Tumah Kala, in that case it makes sense that there would be a double Tumah, because Tumas Medris is a stricter, it's a higher level Tumah. As we said, that's an Ava Tumah. So that would add something to the lighter tumah, the more lenient tumah, which is the rishon, the fact that the zav touched it. And so maybe that's why it has the double tumah. Aval hacha, but over here, in our case, on the previous amud, the idi v'idi tumah kal, over there, we're talking about a situation where it was identical tumah. That was talking about a carbon mincha, again, that was split in half, and so then it was touched before they were together in the same vessel, and then it's touched again when the two halves are together in the same vessel. So that's the exact same tumah. So they're already low. There we wouldn't say that. There, the second time it's touched by the individual who is tameh, it's not going to receive the tumah a second time. And so therefore there's really no proof from this Mishnah. And the Gemara continues and says, Elami Seifa, but rather we can bring a proof from the end. The Braisa brings the following admission of Rabbi Yossi. Moder Rabbi Yossi admits, B'shnei Sadin HaMekufalin, let's say you have two sheets that are folded, Umunachin Zeh al Zeh, they're placed one on top of the other. V'yashav Zav alein, and so now the Zav, he sits upon them. So Sha'el Tameh Medris, so the upper sheet, that has Tumas Medris, because again he's lying, he's sitting upon it. V'hatachton, but the lower sheet, so there it has really two kinds of Tumah. Tameh Medris, it has the Tumah of Medris because he's lying upon that one as well. Umaga Medris, but it's also touching the first sheet, so it has Maga Medris as well. And so there already Rabbi Yossi admits that it does have both kinds of Tumah. But again we can say, V'yamai, why should it have both? Leima Savalei Tumah, if there's a concept of Savalei Tumah, so we should say it's satiated with Tumah, it shouldn't have both. But the Gemara says there's no proof. Hasam over there, bevasachas, everything is happening all at once at the exact same time, and therefore it makes sense that both tumas can take effect. But over here in our case, bozach arzeh, it's one after the other, and therefore again it could be that there's a concept of savalei tuma by zach arzeh, even though that does not exist by basachas. And Rashi explains, again, when the sheet is made into a curtain, tahor min ha-medris, it is pure from the medris tumah, v'lo yitma od adam, and therefore it doesn't have the high level of tumah, so it can't make a person tameh, sharei ein asoy lemedris. And the reason for this is, once it's made into a curtain, it is not made to be sat upon or to be lied upon. V'chol she'eino roy lemedris, if it's not fit for medris, if that's not what it's being used for, ein tameh medris, it no longer has the tumah of medris. Damrinan b'Meseches chagiga, because we say in Meseches chagiga, misha miyuchad liyeshiva, the tumas medris is only when it's designated for sitting upon. Yotza zeh, that excludes this case, she'omer lo amod v'nasa malachtenu, something where we would say stand up and let's do our work, meaning if it's not designated for yeshiva, for sitting, but some other function, it doesn't have that tumas medris. Avol tamei mago medris, but it would have the tumah of touching something that's medris, latame ochlim umashkim, in which case it's a rishon latuma, that it can make food or drink tamei, kamisha naga b'medris, as if it touched medris. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Isaron shechilko, you have an Isaron for karva mincha that is divided, V'avad echad mehen, and then one of the halves is lost, V'hifresh acher tachtav, so he separates another half Isaron to put it together with that first half, and then V'nimtza harishon, then the first one that was lost is found, and so now there's extra, there's more than is needed, V'harei shloshton munochen bebisa, now all three of them, all three halves of the Isaron are now placed in one container, so nitma ovid, so let's say the one that got lost, let's say that becomes tameh. So avud v'rishon mitzdarfen. So the lost one is associated with the first one, and so therefore they combine and they can both become tameh. But mufresh, but the one that was separated after to replace the lost one, that is not associated with the lost one. So ein mitzdaref, it's not connected and it does not become tameh. Nitma mufresh. Similarly, let's say the one that was separated to replace the lost one becomes tameh. So mufresh v'rishon mitzdarfen. Again, the one that was separated to replace the lost one, it's associated with that original Chatzi Isaron that was not lost, and so therefore they combine, they're both Tameh. But the lost one, which it's not associated with, Ein Mitzdaref, it doesn't combine, and therefore it does not become Tameh. Nitma Rishon, but let's say the first one becomes Tameh, that's associated with both, so Shnei Mitzdarfen, they both combine, and everything becomes Tameh in that situation. The Gemara continues, Abaya says, Afilu nitma echad mehen nami, even if any one of them becomes tamei, shneim mitzdarfen, they both join together, everything becomes tamei. My time, what's the reason? Kulu b'nei biksa dahadadininu, they're all of the same cabin, that's the literal translation. The idea is, they're all essentially associated with the same mincha. And the Gemara continues, V'chein le'inyan kamitza, the same discussion is with regards to the kometz, let's say the fistful that's taken from this karba mincha. Kamatz min ha'avud, let's say the kamitza is taken from the one that was lost. So shiyarav v'rishon nechol, and so the remainder obviously of the one that's lost, and also of the first one that's associated with it, that can all be considered shirayim and eaten. But mufresh, but the one that was separated to replace the lost one, that's not associated with the lost one, eino nechol, that is not eaten as a remainder. Kamatz min ha-mufresh, similarly, let's say the kamitza is taken from the one that was separated, again to replace the one that was lost, so shiyara v'rishon nechol, and its remainder and the first one can be eaten, those are associated with one another. But the one that was lost, eino nechol, it cannot be eaten because it's not associated with the mufresh. Kamatz min rishon, let's say the kamitza is taken from the first one, that first half that wasn't lost and not the replacement one, so it's associated with both and we don't really know which one. So then shneim eino nechol, and those two other ones, they cannot be eaten because we have no idea which one the kometz is associated and permits, and which one is considered remainder, and so therefore again those other two cannot be eaten. Abaya says, Afilu kamatz me'echad mehen, even if the kamitza is taken from any one of them, shneihen eino nechol, and the rest of them, the other two, cannot be eaten. It doesn't matter which one it's taken from. My time, what's the reason? Kulu nami b'nei biksa dahadadininu, again, they're all of the same cabin, and therefore they're all essentially associated. We don't really know which other of the two the kometz is associated with, and therefore the other two cannot be eaten as remainder. Only the one it's taken from can be eaten. And the Gemara continues, Ma'askif lo Rav Papa asks on this, V'shirayim didei miho necholin, but the implication of Abaya is the other two, since we don't know which it's associated with, cannot be eaten. But the one that the kometz is taken from, that chatzi isaron, that one is able to be eaten. The remainder is able to be eaten. The kometz is associated with that. But the problem is it's not the right amount, because if you're taking the kometz, really when you're taking the kometz, it is associated with a full isaron. And so you have to say half of the kometz is associated with this isaron and half is associated with that isaron. And so what's going to end up happening over here is ha'ika dinka de kometz, the lokarev. You have actually 1/6 of the kometz that hasn't actually been offered properly. What that means to say is this kometz that was taken, half of it is supposed to be designated for this chatzi isaron and half for the other chatzi isaron, if we would be able to accurately identify that other chatzi isaron. And so really it's supposed to be half of this kometz that's going towards this chatzi isaron that is being permitted over here. But the problem is, in this particular case, again, we have 3 chatzi isarons, and so therefore only 1/3 of the kometz is going towards this chatzi isaron, not 1/2 of it. If one were to divide this kometz into 6 portions, it's supposed to be 3 out of the 6 that are going towards this chatzi isaron. But in this case, only 2 out of the 6 are going towards this chatzi isaron, and that's why it's saying over here in the Gemara that 1/6 of the kometz is missing for this remainder, and therefore, again, even shirayim didei should not be able to be eaten. And the Gemara continues and asks along the same lines, Ma'askif lo Rav Yitzchak b'reider of Mesharshia. Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Mesharshia, asks, the kometz gufe, the kometz itself that's being taken, hechi karev, how can it be offered? How can it be brought to the mizbeach? Ha'ika tilsa chulin. Again, 1/3 of this kometz is really going to be chulin, because again, we know 2 out of the 3 portions are going towards the legitimate isaron of the karba mincha, but there's this extra chatzi isaron, and therefore 1/3 of the kometz going towards that is really chul, and it should not be able to be offered on the mizbeach. And the Gemara answers to that. Rav Ashi says, kometz bedaita de kohen talya milsa. The kometz, really it all depends on the intention of the kohen. The kohen ki kometz, a isaron ka kometz. When the kohen is taking the kometz, he's thinking about an isaron, and therefore it really is not going on the one that is chulin. And in terms of burning it on the mizbeach, that is not a problem. And Rashi explains, Amar Rav Ashi says, Hanach Tarti Pirchi, these last 2 questions, La Pirchi, they're not questions. The Kevin de lo kamatz elemino echot, since he took the kamitza just from one of the chatzi sarons, kmitzas hamincha bedaita de kohen talia. The kamitza, it all depends on the intention of the kohen. The kohen ki kamatz adaita de isaron chadhu de kamatz. When he's taking the kometz, he's thinking of one isaron. Hilkach kometz karav, therefore the kometz can be offered on the mizbeach, and shiyare rishon necholin, and the remainder of that rishon that he's taking the kometz from can be eaten. Vashnayim eino necholin, but the other 2 cannot be eaten. Mishum de'ein lamod al sofa, because we can't determine which one of those 2 it's going on. Eza mehen nitztaref im rishon, which one combines with the first one. Bedas hakohen lios niter bekometz, and therefore it is with the intention of the kohen that the kometz is able to permit. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chof Hey Amud Aleph.